So this video is all about the labeling thought meditation technique. So let's begin with what we already know. So what we already know is that we have so many thoughts, but what we may not know is how our thoughts actually affect how we feel and affect our life. And this technique can help us do that. So it helps by seeing, because we start to label our thoughts, so we become the witness of our thoughts, the observer of our thoughts. And so we really start to see how our thoughts are the cause or the root from how we actually feel. And as the saying goes, there is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. This is really seen through this process, not just from an intellectual level, from a mental level of understanding that, but from an experiential level. We really see how thoughts affect how we feel. Another benefit of this technique is that it lessens any negative emotion. So if you're feeling stressed, anxious, or worried about something, when you practice this technique, as you become the witness and the observer of your thoughts, the thoughts have less control and less power over you. So you start to get a bit of space between you and the thought. And so by having that extra space, you start to recognize that you have a choice to believe in that thought, to let that thought actually affect you. Another benefit of this particular technique is that you see how unproductive and repetitive most of your thoughts actually are. So you see that most thoughts actually serve no real purpose and cause actually negative emotions. And by actually seeing this, again, from an experiential level rather than just from a mental level, the thoughts become less attractive to you and you become less attached to them. So in the techniques of meditation, which so many of them, we are constantly reminding ourselves to move away from thoughts and onto the object of the meditation. This particular technique helps to become less attached to them. The thoughts are less desirable because you know from this experience that they're useless, they're usually unproductive, and they're mostly repetitive, that you don't need to be thinking about. So it really, of course, helps in mindfulness practices, in meditation practices, and generally just living in the present moment. Another benefit of this is, of course, by continuing with this practice, you kind of like make a little scratch in that habitual record that keeps getting played of your conditioning or your habitual patterns. And as you practice it, by creating these little scratches, you of course are creating a big scratch would then hopefully mean the record doesn't play anymore. So your habits or your conditioning doesn't get played out, and you form a new habit of being the observer, the witness, and not letting those thoughts affect you. And ultimately, the last benefit is that it prepares you for advanced levels of meditation. So advanced levels of meditations, of course, go beyond the thought. And this particular technique, of course, starts you on the journey of going beyond the thoughts, because you recognize that I am not my thoughts, which leads you to the next question of, well, then who am I? Or who am I beyond the thoughts? Or who am I if I let this thought go? Which is a really powerful question. And so it takes you on the road, on the path to self-realization and self-inquiry. Now let's have a look at some techniques, and the technique that I recommend is the following. So set aside 10 minutes if you can, and put a timer actually on so you don't have to be worrying about time. Then practice a very simple meditation technique, such as feeling the breath coming in and out through the nostrils, or a counting backwards, counting breath meditation technique. And I have a video of that if you're wanting to have a look at that first. Then once you start the practice, of course, have the focus not on, okay, I'm looking out for thoughts. Have it on the actual meditation practice. But sooner or later, there will be a thought that comes up that you find yourself distracted on, that you maybe just realized that there is a thought that has entered your awareness as well. And the moment you do, stop and just write it down. And write it down as a word that represents the kind of theme or what that thought was about. So for example, if you started thinking about, I wonder what I'm going to eat for dinner, maybe just write dinner or food. So, and then of course come back to the technique that you were practicing, which if it was counting backwards or the breathing through the nostrils, and just continue that practice. Every time you have a thought, you realize you've been distracted by a thought, write that thought down on the piece of paper next to you. And then after 10 minutes, so once the timer goes off, have a look at what you've actually written down. And notice if there are any kind of patterns or themes or categories that you can put your thoughts in. So such as past thoughts or future thoughts, or worry thoughts, or loathing thoughts, like self-loathing thoughts. See if you can put all the thoughts actually in certain themes or categories. And then see if there's any connections to the thoughts and how you actually feel. So sometimes it's even nice to notice one thought and maybe play it out again and see how it affects you, both emotionally and physically. And then lastly, put a label next to them, whether it's useful or if it's a useless thought. So go through all the thoughts and just see how beneficial it was to think of that. Did it give you anything, or was it pretty useless? And then this is just, of course, a beautiful thing to have a look at, to be observing about your thought structure, and then every day see if you have a similar pattern or if it changes. If you also identify a very strong thought, that one that actually brings about a lot of emotion, you might want to delve a little bit deeper into that with the work of Byron Katie. Her work, she actually calls it The Work, and I've included a link in this video below, and it's pretty much thework.com, and she asks 4 questions for any thought that you have that is affecting you deeply. So it's a really good extra process to do if you want to start to get to the bottom and start to solve some of these conditioning patterns, these habitual thought patterns. So that's really the technique. Eventually you might actually not need to write them down. You might just want to mentally see it and then let it go. And ultimately you just want to be seeing all thoughts as inner objects that you're observing, which don't have to have any effect on you, but you can simply be the outside observing them from afar. The ultimate goal is, of course, to be able to let go of all the thoughts and be able to recognize that they are simply just thoughts and not who you are. And lastly, a little metaphor that helps with thoughts is, of course, this metaphor of a beach ball. So if you imagine a beach ball and in a pool of water, that a beach ball is a representative of your thoughts. If your thoughts are popping up and you're just trying to push that beach ball down into the water, it just will pop up somewhere else. And if you push it down there, it'll pop up somewhere else. And so you don't want to be trying to push away the thoughts. If you just let the thoughts pop up and just simply observe them, that they're there and they're there, they don't have to affect you. They can simply be around you. And that is, of course, a wonderful benefit of being able to observe thoughts from afar and not need to actually be pushing them or trying to get rid of them. So hope you enjoy that technique. Let me know how you go. And if you have any questions, please give me a shout out. Thanks.